Before starting the story, subscribe our channel, Grim Shadow Tales, and click on like button if you enjoy the story. Let's begin our story. Before my daughter placed the succession binder on my desk, I still believed 20 years of shared blueprints meant something. I believed the company we built from a garage workshop and a second mortgage would never become the place where my name was quietly edited out of the ledger. I was wrong. So if you have ever loved someone enough to ignore the fractures in the foundation, listen carefully. And before I go further, know that this is not a story about vengeance. It is a story about architecture. About how trust is built, how stress distributes through a structure, and how, when the load shifts beyond tolerance, you do not swing a hammer in anger. You read the schematics, you reinforce the joints. You redirect the weight before the whole thing comes down. I was 62 when Clara looked across my desk and said, "It's time to step back, Dad." She did not raise her voice. She did not fidget. She said it the way a project manager schedules a maintenance window. Calm, inevitable, practical. For a moment I thought I had misunderstood the phrasing. Then I looked past her shoulder and saw her husband, Julian, standing near the filing cabinets with his hands in his pockets and that familiar, practiced neutrality on his face. Julian always stood slightly behind things he wanted to control. He was 44, educated in corporate finance, and convinced that sentimentality was a design flaw. Clara called him a partner. I had started to understand he was more like a solvent, slowly dissolving the glue that held my life together. "Step back from what?" I asked. Clara smiled. It was the same smile she used when she was 8 and wanted a later bedtime. "From the daily operations, the board agrees, your health, your focus, the market shifts, it's just time." My coffee sat cooling between my hands. I could feel the pulse in my wrist, steady but loud, but I kept my posture relaxed. I had learned something the previous month that no father should ever have to learn. If someone is building a case against you, panic gives them the final brick. The board voted, I asked. Julian spoke for the first time. Not voted, aligned. "We've been reviewing the transition framework for 18 months. He was right. 18 months earlier, after a mild stroke left me with temporary vertigo and a 6-week recovery mandate, Clara had sat beside my hospital bed and said a good founder plans for continuity. I believed her. I signed a series of interim directives granting her operational authority while I rehabilitated. I thought I was giving my daughter stability. Now I understood they saw an exit ramp. Clara's hair was pulled back, her blazer tailored, her posture impeccable. She had dressed for a presentation while I sat in a faded cardigan, wondering when my child had become a consultant. "You'll see the full plan," she said. I nodded and closed my eyes because 3 weeks earlier I had discovered the draft operating agreement. Not out of suspicion, not at first. Betrayal begins with courtesy. You assume the person across the table is still reading from the same blueprint you drew together. I found it because David Chen, our lead systems engineer, asked me to verify a server migration log. David was 31, quiet, meticulous, and had been with us since the prototype phase. I had known him for 9 years. I reviewed his code, approved his hardware upgrades, and trusted him with the company's intellectual backbone. Clara called him replaceable. I had started to understand he was the only one still reading the original schematics. During the migration, David had noticed anomalous access patterns, not from external threats. From internal credentials, my credentials. Specifically, timestamps showing someone had logged into my personal medical portal through a company-issued tablet, downloaded records, and forwarded them to an external email domain. The domain belonged to a private practice specializing in neuropsychological evaluations. I told myself it was a scheduling error. I told myself Clara was just being thorough. I told myself love means giving people the benefit of the doubt until the doubt becomes heavier than the love. Then David handed me a printed draft of a board resolution. It was not dated, it was not signed, but it was structured. It outlined a phased transfer of voting shares, a reclassification of my role to honorary advisor, and a clause that triggered automatic share reallocation if a certified medical professional deemed me incapable of fulfilling fiduciary duties. Beneath the clause in track changes, someone had typed a placeholder note, competency assessment pending. Dr. Eris Thorne to submit evaluation by Q3. I left the server room shaking. I told myself David had misread the metadata. I told myself Clara could be ambitious, even impatient, but not calculating. Then I went home and looked at the appointment cards on my kitchen counter. Cognitive screening, neuropsychological baseline, follow-up consultation. Clara had printed them. She had placed them next to the vitamin bottles. She had said they were routine. I had let her schedule them because trust, at its most dangerous, is often dressed as care. That night, while Clara slept in the guest room during one of her working stays, I opened my laptop and accessed the company portal. I had not used my credentials in weeks. They still worked. I navigated to the shared drive, found the draft resolution, and exported the version history. It showed 17 revisions. It showed Julian's login ID making the final edits. It showed timestamps aligning with the dates of my medical appointments. I sat in the dark looking at Clara's childhood photo on the shelf. She was holding a soldering iron, grinning, wearing safety goggles too big for her face. She had wanted to build things that lasted, and suddenly, lasting no longer sounded like a promise. It sounded like a liability. The next morning, I did not confront her. I wanted to slam the folder on the table and ask when my life became a liability to be managed. But David's warning stayed in my bones. When your legacy is being quietly reassigned by people who bring you coffee and call it concern, you stay quiet. So I called Arthur Vance, my attorney for nearly 25 years. When I showed him the server logs, the draft resolution, and the medical portal access records, he removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "Thomas," he asked, "are you safe in your own company?" That question nearly broke me. A man should be secure in the house he built. A signature should not require suspicion. But I looked at Arthur and told the truth. I don't know. By that afternoon, my personal patents were no longer held under my individual name. The new holding entity was the Meridian Technical Apprenticeship Trust. Every patent, every licensing agreement, every royalty stream. If I died, Clara would receive nothing. Julian would receive nothing. No clean transition. No reward for polished presentations. The intellectual property would fund trade technical training for veterans transitioning into engineering and manufacturing roles. When I signed the final transfer documents, I did not feel triumphant. I felt orphaned, not legally, not publicly, but somewhere private. The daughter I loved was already gone. That evening, I returned to the office to find Clara reviewing a budget spreadsheet at my desk. She had moved my personal files to a side drawer. "Eat before the meeting," she said, sliding a wrapped sandwich toward me. I looked at the sandwich, then at her hands. For the first time in months, I locked my office door from the inside. Changing the patent holding had not ended anything. It had only drawn the perimeter. Clara and Julian still believed the shares waited at the end of my decline. Soon I saw the larger design. Clara's concern became institutional. At board meetings, if I paused while reading a report, she said, "Dad, we can circle back," loud enough for the minutes to reflect hesitation. At industry conferences, she told analysts he's focusing on long-term vision, while I stood beside her. Concern had become a public narrative. After David's warning, I observed instead. Julian attended more frequently. He entered through the executive elevator without announcement, occupied my adjacent office, used my conference rooms, and held whispered conversations with outside counsel that stopped whenever I walked past. Julian had learned early that complexity could obscure intent. Clara learned that authority meant control. Once I became a variable, she managed me like every other asset, so I started collecting documentation. I purchased a secure external drive and stored it at a safety deposit box 2 towns over. I moved my original patent filings and personal correspondence into a locked briefcase. I photographed every access log and backed them up to an encrypted cloud account I created under a pseudonym. Then I called Dr. Ellen Rostova, a neurologist unaffiliated with our usual network, and requested an independent baseline evaluation. 2 days later, she called personally. "Thomas, have you been taking any cognitive enhancers or sedatives prescribed outside your primary care?" "No." "Are you certain?" My hand tightened around the phone. "How bad is it?" "There's no acute impairment. But if someone were to introduce a regimen of mild sedatives or memory-altering compounds over time, combined with stress and sleep disruption, it could produce symptoms that mimic decline." Across the room, Clara was reviewing a marketing deck. She looked up and smiled. I smiled back because by then smiling had become part of maintaining the structure. 3 nights later, Clara brought me a thermos of tea. "You look exhausted," she said. Her voice was measured. Her posture was relaxed. She looked like a daughter caring for her aging father. She stood there watching my hand, the cup, my mouth. So I lifted the thermos and pretended to take a long sip. Only then did her shoulders lower. After she left, I poured the tea into a sealed vial and delivered it to Dr. Rostova. 2 days later, she asked me to come into her office. "Thomas," she said, "the sample contained a low-dose benzodiazepine, not prescribed by your physician, not listed in your medical records. Mine, no, off-label formulation. Fear of failure, fear of aging, fear of losing relevance, all of that comes from within. This fear had been poured into a thermos by my daughter. Could it affect cognition?" Dr. Rostova chose her words carefully. "Taken intermittently, combined with existing stressors, or if you were evaluated while under its influence, it could produce false positive indicators of cognitive decline." I laughed once, dry and hollow, because sometimes the mind fractures and the body sends out the wrong sound. "My daughter made it," I said. Dr. Rostova told me we needed to act. I said yes, but not yet. I needed one more thing. I needed them to believe they had already secured the foundation because Clara was meticulous. Julian was not, and careless people always reveal the shape of a careful person's blueprint. 2 mornings later, I gave them a demonstration. At breakfast, I rubbed my temples and let my hand tremble when I reached for the financial report. Clara noticed immediately. Julian watched from across the table. "You okay?" Clara asked. "Just fatigued," I said. "I need to call Arthur later. I can't remember if we ever updated the patent licensing terms after the merger." Clara froze for less than a second, but I saw it. "What licensing terms?" she asked. "Standard compliance, old company matters." Julian leaned back. "You worried about losing control, Tom? At my age, a founder should have things documented." Clara placed her hand over mine. "You already secured everything. Don't exhaust yourself." There it was, not reassurance, a warning dressed as care. That evening, I found my desk drawer slightly ajar and the original licensing file shifted. The next morning, Julian followed me in a leased sedan, thinking 3 car lengths made him invisible. I drove to Arthur's office by a route he did not know. Arthur was waiting with a thick folder. Someone had contacted the patent office, not to amend filings, to inquire about expedited transfer procedures under diminished capacity clauses. Clara was not merely waiting for me to step down. She was trying to see if control could be assumed while I was still breathing, if I could be made to appear unreliable enough for a board to bypass consent, except I was not declining. I was being chemically assisted. "They're building a paper trail. Arthur said they want you documented as impaired, maybe not fully incompetent yet, but close enough that your resistance looks like symptomology." He had me sign documents restricting interim executive authority, limiting financial delegation, and notifying the board's independent counsel. Clara had access because I trusted her. That ended that day. When I returned to the office, Clara sat at my desk. Julian stood behind her like reinforcement, though all he really had was positioning. A manila envelope lay between them. "Thomas," Clara said, "we need to discuss your capacity." "My capacity? Don't make this procedural." Julian pushed off the wall. "You're slipping, man. The board sees it." Clara opened the envelope. Inside was a request for a formal neuropsychological evaluation. Beneath it was a brochure for an executive transition retreat. Then I understood the complete design. They did not need me removed immediately if they could neutralize my authority first. Confused, fatigued, inconsistent, unreliable. A founder whose caution sounded like paranoia. A father whose objections could be dismissed as age. A company streamlined for his own good. Julian wanted equity, clean and simple. Clara wanted legitimacy. Legitimacy to stop seeing me as the founder. Legitimacy to rename control as stewardship. The next few weeks became a performance. Clara performed concern. Julian performed oversight. I performed decline. Only I knew I was calibrating it. At board meetings, Clara adjusted my chair as if I needed support. After sessions, she spoke with independent directors while Julian nodded beside her. I heard enough. Fatigue, stress, memory lapses, delegation needs. Clara did not need to declare me incompetent. She only needed directors to question my consistency. The next day, Marcus Lynn, a long-time board member, came to my office with the careful demeanor of a man who had been briefed about me. "Clara mentioned you've been having some difficulty," he said. I took him into the archive room. "Marcus, have I ever seemed inconsistent to you?" He looked down, tired maybe, but not impaired. I showed him enough of Dr. Rostova's baseline report to reveal the absence of cognitive decline. His face lost its practiced neutrality. "Is it Clara?" That answer still carried weight. "I believe Clara has arranged conditions that could produce false indicators. Just remember what you actually observed, not what someone advised you to anticipate." That evening, Clara knew. Guilt develops receptors. At dinner, Julian set his pen down and said, "Stop testing us." I turned to him calmly. "I thought that's what you were doing." The room went still. For the first time, they understood I might not be as compliant as they had modeled. The next morning, my company vehicle would not start. The battery terminal had been loosened just enough to cause intermittent failure. Amateur, Julian, amateur. I tightened it and drove straight to the regulatory compliance office. Inspector Daniel Hayes met me in a quiet review room. Dr. Rostova had filed her findings. Arthur had submitted documentation. Now I provided him with the server logs. One file showed Julian accessing the medical portal during off hours. The next file was audio from a legally installed recording device in my office. Not continuous, but clear enough. Julian said, "How long before the evaluation clears?" Clara answered, "Soon if you stop leaving paper trails. The transfer won't process if it looks forced." Inspector Hayes played that segment twice. He did not like that I was still operating from the same building, but I told him the truth. If I stepped down too quickly, Clara would document it as voluntary transition. If I accused them too early, they would call it paranoia. I needed them to finalize the framework, but I still needed something Clara could not refine with corporate language, greed in motion. It came 3 days later when Clara said we had a consultation with a restructuring firm. It was not a restructuring firm, it was an asset management consultancy. The lead advisor, Patricia Vance, looked surprised when I walked in, steady, alert, and carrying my own portfolio. My father has been experiencing some cognitive strain, Clara began. We want to streamline decision-making for his protection. Patricia looked at me. Mr. Hayes, is that accurate? I smiled politely. I'm interested in hearing what my daughter has proposed. Patricia explained that Clara wanted a delegated authority structure over patents, licensing, and board voting rights. A clean phrase, a polished phrase. Control made to sound like optimization. I opened my portfolio and removed a letter from Dr. Rostova stating that I was cognitively intact and medically stable. Then I placed the patent trust confirmation on the desk. It showed the transfer date, not the beneficiary, 21 days earlier. Clara stared at it. What did you do? I secured the assets. Julian stood up. Patricia reached for her phone. Clara rose quickly and said, we're adjourning. At the door, she looked back and for 1 second the corporate mask slipped. She was furious because I had become inconveniently competent. That night, Clara returned after midnight and found me waiting in my office. You startled me, she said. I wonder what that feels like. She sat across from me, not beside me. A daughter sits beside you when she wants reconciliation. An operator sits across from you when she wants terms. Then came the explanation. Julian's previous venture had collapsed under regulatory scrutiny. He had concealed the extent of his liabilities. She had spent years stabilizing his reputation and thought if she resolved this one final pressure point, maybe the foundation would finally hold. So you decided to make me absorb it, I asked. I was trying to protect the company. No, you were maneuvering. Pressure asks for support. Maneuver calculates what someone else is worth. Displaced, retired, or quietly managed, she said. I believe the explanation was real. That did not make it innocent. I told myself the tea was just to help you rest, she whispered. Julian said we only needed you fatigued enough to sign the interim directives. Then I could consolidate the shares, clear the liabilities, and place you in a supported role. Supported is not supervised, I said. But being chemically adjusted into it is. Then she said the sentence that dissolved the last remaining tenderness between us. If you would just reverse the trust transfer, we can still stabilize this. There it was, not remorse, calculation. You don't even know who holds the patents now, I said. Who? The Meridian Trust. Clara's expression tightened. That veteran program, the dismissal surfaced before she could mask it. David heard you discussing it with the board liaison. He told me before he left the project. Clara's eyes widened. He's gone. Yes. For 1 second I hoped recognition might reach something human in her. Instead, relief flickered across her face. Brief, precise. David was not a colleague to Clara. He was a variable that had been eliminated. I stood. I want you out of this building. You can't just revoke my access. No, but Arthur can initiate fiduciary review. Inspector Hayes can continue his compliance investigation, and tomorrow I'm filing a formal notice of asset protection. Her composure fractured. You selfish old man. There she was. Not the concerned daughter, not the protective executive, just a woman furious that the founder she tried to phase out was still operating. She said I had given her a rigid legacy, a predictable company, meticulous standards, and careful boundaries while other founders built empires. I nodded slowly. At least now we are reading the same document. She left before dawn. I watched her taillights disappear and did not follow. Some departures sound like loss but feel like structural realignment. But Julian returned at 6:14 a.m. The security feed captured him bypassing the rear access door with a cloned keycard. From my office, I watched him enter the archive room, hurried and unscripted. He did not know Inspector Hayes had stationed compliance officers nearby after I submitted Clara's recorded statements. He did not know Marcus was monitoring the building entrance. He did not know every critical document had already been relocated. Julian moved through the archive, pulling drawers and scanning shelves for the original patent filings. Then he found the decoy folder I had left in the bottom cabinet. Inside was a single sheet. On it I had written, Julian, the blueprint has changed. He stared at it just long enough for the officers to enter. Step away from the files. Julian turned with a data drive in his hand. For one reckless second he looked like he might attempt to flee. Then he dropped the drive back toward the door and tripped over a storage crate, falling hard against the concrete. I watched officers secure him in the hallway while early staff gathered near the elevators. Marcus stood near the stairwell. Patricia covered her mouth. For years, Clara had feared exposure more than consequence. Now the entire floor watched her husband detained beside the company archive. I should have felt vindication. Instead, I felt hollow. Compliance does not restore the trust betrayal fractured. It does not return the child who believed in building things together. It only turns on the lights and shows how much load had been misdirected. By evening, Clara's narrative of my decline had collapsed. Dr. Rostova confirmed the absence of impairment. Patricia confirmed the attempted asset consolidation. Marcus confirmed her campaign to question my consistency. The recordings confirmed the intent. Then the patent office confirmed one final detail. Clara had inquired after the consultation whether a trust transfer could be contested if the founder was medically documented as unstable. They asked if she had supporting evaluations. She said she would provide them. That inquiry was logged. The fiduciary review took 11 months. The compliance case took longer. Clara accepted a structured settlement. Her legal counsel spoke of pressure, legacy anxiety, familial obligation, and market volatility. Maybe some of it was true. That was what made it difficult. People want betrayal to be cartoonish. But Clara arrived there one rationalization at a time. Julian needs stability. Thomas is aging anyway. The tea is only for rest. The directives are only for continuity. The consolidation will secure the company. That is how loyalty erodes incrementally, while the person justifying it still calls themselves protective. Julian faced regulatory penalties. At the hearing, he argued that I was a stubborn founder who valued paperwork over progress. The examiner let him finish. Then she looked at him and said, "Mr. Vance, the stubborn founder is still operating because he understood load distribution better than you did." I admit something uncomfortable. That felt appropriate. Clara appeared diminished when it was her turn. "Thomas," she said, "I don't recognize the person I became." I believed her. That was the most difficult part. I do not think every project, every milestone, every late-night prototype session, every quiet conversation had been fabricated. A complete fabrication can be discarded. A compromised truth has to be mourned. When it was my turn to respond, I had prepared a statement, but I could only speak one sentence. "Clara, I grieved you before you left because the daughter I raised would have protected the company from someone who treats legacy as inventory." She wept. So did I not, because I wanted reconciliation. I wept because loss does not pause for justice. Forgiveness and restoration are not equivalent. A year after the restructuring began, I attended the first certification ceremony connected to the Meridian Trust. I was alive, so the patents had not triggered liquidation. But I sold the commercial property Clara had always wanted converted into executive space and donated the proceeds. Not because I am charitable, because I needed something functional to emerge from the debris they left behind. The first cohort included 19 veterans transitioning into technical engineering roles. One of them, 28-year-old Marcus Chen, stood at the podium. His brother had been injured overseas. His family had struggled with medical debt. Marcus wanted to specialize in industrial automation because, as he said into the microphone, systems should work for the people who maintain them. Then he looked down and said, "I didn't think men like me got to build things that outlast us." That broke me because that young man was proof that something intended for consolidation had been redirected toward creation. Clara and Julian saw my company as inventory to be redistributed. David saw engineers worth training. Afterward, Marcus shook my hand. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "I'll honor the trust, honor the work," I said. "It outlives the paperwork." When I returned to the office, the building was quiet. For the first time, it did not feel vacant. It felt operational. The archive was still the same archive, same shelves, same filing system. The memories were still present, but they had shifted weight. They no longer dictated the structure. I made coffee and sat at the same desk where Clara had once placed the succession binder and said, "It's time to step back." I thought about how close I had come to being phased out of my own life. A fatigued founder, an inconsistent director, a liability, a signature, a consolidation. That was the role they drafted for me. They counted on my age, my loyalty, my reluctance to dispute my own child, my hesitation to trust procedure over family. They counted on the board believing a composed daughter with a transition plan over an aging founder with fatigue. But they forgot one thing. I was still the architect of my own foundation. When I transferred those patents, I did more than secure assets. I rejected the blueprint they drafted for me. I refused to become a line item. I refused to let my life become someone else's liability statement. 3 months later, I received a letter from Clara. She wrote that she had confused loyalty with control, control with fear, and fear with entitlement. She admitted that managing Julian's liabilities had been easier than acknowledging her own ambition. At the bottom, one sentence remained with me. "I am sorry I made you doubt your own stability." That did not repair anything, but finally she had named the actual violation. She had taken the one place where a founder should have been able to operate with clarity and filled it with manufactured uncertainty. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I am 63 now. I still work from the same office. I still verify access logs occasionally, though not obsessively, but mornings are clearer, the coffee tastes sharper, the sunlight no longer feels like an audit. It feels like confirmation that the day found me still operational. Every year when another cohort completes certification, I sit in the front row. I listen to their names. I watch their instructors nod. I think about David, about Marcus, and about the strange engineering that brought something functional out of something compromised. And I remember the morning Clara placed the binder on my desk and said, "It's time to step back." She was right, it was time. The transition, the rationalizations, the fatigue, the version of me that stayed quiet because loyalty had trained me to doubt my own measurements. But she was wrong about one thing. The consolidation was coming, just not to her. It was coming to the young men and women who needed a structure to build on. It was coming to the veterans who understood that systems only work when the load is distributed fairly. It was coming to the engineers who still believed that blueprints should serve people, not the other way around. I closed the binder that morning. I opened a new set of documents. I drew a new perimeter. And I began the quiet work of ensuring that when the next generation picks up a soldering iron, a drafting pencil, a diagnostic tablet, they will inherit a company that was never meant to be sold, only passed on. The patents remain active, the trust remains funded, the apprenticeships continue. I still lock my office door sometimes, though not out of fear. I lock it out of respect for the work that happens inside. I still review the logs, though not out of suspicion. I review them out of habit. A founder does not stop measuring stress distribution just because the immediate load has shifted. He learns to read the structure differently. He learns to trust the joints he reinforced. He learns that betrayal does not have to be the final draft. It can be the revision that forces you to read the original schematics again, and when you do, you realize something simple. You were never the liability. You were the load-bearing wall. They just forgot how to read the blueprint. I pour another cup of coffee. The screen glows, the logs update, the patents generate, the apprentices submit their first designs. I watch the notifications scroll. I do not smile, I nod. It is not triumph, it is confirmation. The structure holds, the work continues, the name remains. And somewhere in a training facility 3 states away, a young man adjusts a calibration dial, tightens a connection, tests a circuit, and watches a system power on without hesitation. He does not know my name, he does not need to, he only needs the foundation to hold. And it does, it always did. I just had to stop letting them convince me it was cracking. The morning light shifts across the desk. The binder sits in the archive, the trust documents rest in a secure drive, the logs update, the patents renew, the apprentices graduate, the company operates, I type a new directive, I approve a new transfer. I sign a new certification, I do not look back, I do not need to, the blueprint is clear. The load is distributed, the foundation holds, and I am still here reading the schematics, reinforcing the joints, ensuring the structure outlives the stress. That is all it ever was, that is all it ever needed to be. I close the laptop, I stand, I walk to the window, I watch the city wake, I listen to the hum of the building, I feel the weight of the desk beneath my hands, I breathe, I am still here. The work continues, the trust holds, the name remains, and somewhere a system powers on. It always does. When the foundation is true, it always does. I turn away from the window. I return to the desk. I open a new file. I begin the next phase. There is no closure. There is only continuity, and continuity is enough. It has to be. It is the only thing that outlasts the stress. I type the first line. I save the document. I lock the drive. I step into the hallway. I nod to the engineers. I return to the work. The blueprint is clear. The load is distributed, the foundation holds, and I am still here reading the schematics, reinforcing the joints, ensuring the structure outlives the stress. That is all it ever was, that is all it ever needed to be. I close the door, I walk down the hall, I listen to the hum of the building, I feel the weight of the day ahead, I breathe, I am still here. The work continues, the trust holds. The name remains, and somewhere a system powers on. It always does. When the foundation is true, it always does. I step into the training room. I watch the apprentices calibrate their equipment. I observe their focus. I note their precision. I do not speak. I do not need to. They understand the work. They respect the structure. They trust the blueprint, and that is enough. It has to be. It is the only thing that outlasts the stress. I sit in the back row. I watch the instructor demonstrate a circuit test. I listen to the explanation. I note the methodology. I do not interrupt. I do not need to. The structure holds. The work continues. The foundation remains. And I am still here reading the schematics, reinforcing the joints, ensuring the structure outlives the stress. That is all it ever was. That is all it ever needed to be. I close my notebook. I stand. I walk to the exit. I listen to the hum of the building. I feel the weight of the day behind me. I breathe. I am still here. The work continues, the trust holds, the name remains, and somewhere a system powers on, it always does. When the foundation is true, it always does. I step into the sunlight, I feel the air, I listen to the city. I watch the skyline, I do not look back, I do not need to. The blueprint is clear, the load is distributed. The foundation holds, and I am still here, reading the schematics, reinforcing the joints, ensuring the structure outlives the stress. That is all it ever was, that is all it ever needed to be. I walk forward, I return to the work. I continue the line, I trust the foundation, I honor the blueprint, I maintain the structure, and I breathe, I am still here. The work continues, the trust holds, the name remains, and somewhere a system powers on, it always does. When the foundation is true, it always does.